But at the end of the day, like
Yeah.
the best thing you can do is just say like, how good can I make my art? If you focus on that, like bare bones, what somebody's getting from you when they buy your NFT, for example, is a piece of art. Make that as good as possible. You put in the time, you put in the effort, you put in the thought. That's the big one. You put in the thought and you will produce better work.
GM. That was a clip from Austin discussing his philosophy around making art, regardless of whether it's a bear or bull market. Welcome back to another episode of the Boonafide Experience podcast. I'm your host, Boona. This is a Web3 podcast that documents the stories of artists, collectors, and true visionaries pushing the boundaries of technology to create a brighter future for all. This week's guest is Austin Visual. Austin is a lens-based artist out of the East Coast who is multidisciplinary by nature and has a keen interest in the new topographic photography style, which focuses more on the common landscapes you see in everyday life. This episode is jam-packed with energy and some spicy takes from Austin. Some of the key points we discuss are the importance of identification as an artist and how to not pigeonhole yourself, multi-layer narratives in the Web3 space, pushing through the bear market, and the heavy focus on creating better art. Lastly, we discuss his super rare Genesis piece, Cabins on Cape Cod, and lastly, his Sleeping Suburbia collection, which is a collection of photos taken in the wee hours of the morning, late at night. Super fantastic collection, one of which I was fortunate enough to pick one up from, and is the background for the folks on YouTube in this intro. Lastly, speaking of people watching on YouTube, you're going to notice this intro looks a little bit different. I'm going to give a massive shout out to the team at Hologram for making this incredible interactive model of my NFT. I'll share some more information about Hologram and who they are in the description below. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, Austin Visual. All right. GM Austin.
Yeah, GM, man. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, dude. It's like just for those, I always like to share a story of like kind of how these podcasts or these like conversations get scheduled or come together. And it's, I've followed you for a while. So ever since I followed Joey the photographer, he goes by Cowboy Killer now. Yeah. Like I remember when I found your work and I was like, oh dude, like that is like super reminds me of Joey, man. And like I knew I had followed you since then, but when we really like kind of like hit it off it was a random impromptu Twitter Spaces. That it was the fake version of your normal Twitter Space.
It was, yeah. So we had this, and we actually haven't been doing it lately. And I got to talk to the boys and see if they want to maybe pick it back up at some point. We were just kind of burnt out, but we had this regular recurring show called the Shutter Show. We did it once a week on Tuesday nights, and we did it for like a year. Me and KJ started it after. We were involved in like Moment Spaces and stuff like early on. And for those who aren't familiar, Moment's this photography company that has a pretty big socials presence, and they do a lot of fun like Twitter Spaces, or they did for a while. We started one up ourselves and we did it for a while. And I remember we kind of like canceled it a bunch of times, and I kept doing like these joking like fake ones, and you showed up in one, and we just we hit it off. We had a really solid conversation for like, I want to say a couple hours, bro. Like we were riffing for sure. We dropped some gems in there. Definitely did.
It was like 9:00 on like a Tuesday or a Wednesday or something like that. It was so random, man. Like, I remember thinking like when I came up, cause I'll do this. So, obviously, Postbook and Natasha, like I've had her on the show as well. And like,
big fan.
I've had to like almost sometimes, like cut myself off in her Discord streams and some of her chats, because I'm like, I know when I get into a room, like I'm gonna like I just have a tendency to I have conversations for a living. That's what I do. Yeah. Right. So it's like I know I can tend to do that. And I remember thinking, I'm like, fuck man, I'm kind of bogarting this, but this is actually kind of dope. Like no one else came up, and that was like the feedback is like,
that's great.
Everyone's like, no man, keep going, dude.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic.
We're enjoying this.
I think it can be challenging. Here, let me just adjust my audio a little bit. There we go. I feel like it can definitely be a little challenging because like, especially on Twitter Spaces where you have like a live audience, and we were kind of talking about this offline.
Yeah.
Like, there's a difference in how people act live, and so it can be kind of challenging to judge. Like, where am I at right now? Are people getting frustrated with me because I do the same thing? I'll go into a room and for 10 minutes I'll just kind of accidentally take it over because I'm so excited about something, and it's tough. But we were perfect. We had a good back and forth. That was a really fun convo. So I feel like this is like, we have a good energy. You know, we hit it off in that space, and this is like, you know, it's matching it right now here too. So it's pretty cool.
Hell yeah, man. No, I'm happy you're here, dude. So I obviously we know each other. We vibe back and forth on Twitter. So just for those that don't know you, man, like, who are you, man? What do you do?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. So my name is Austin again. I go by Austin Visual now. That's kind of like my alias at this point. But I'm a photographer, and I've produced a bit of work in the NFT space. I'm pretty involved there. And I feel like that, you know, pretty much summarizes everything that's crucial to, you know, my identity. I'm just a photographer. So I always never know what to say. It's like the one question, like, I feel like I'm pretty articulate sometimes, but that's like the one question that always, like, it's so broad, and I'm like, I don't know what I am. I'm a photographer. But yeah, I'm a
it's good, man. But I think it's good though, man. Like, it's good to keep it simple, because you know, like I said, you're very articulated with like how you present yourself and how you speak and how you go about what you do. And so I think it's almost a good thing to just keep something like super general and super broad, because like one of the goals in this like I still, the joy of podcasting is I don't know exactly who my audience is that listens to this podcast. Right. You know, like, I know I have a mixed bag of, obviously I have people in Web3 and artists and photographers and technologists that follow along. But I imagine I still have some people that are like followed me back from like the Twitch and video game content creation days, where it's like there's still some people on the fence. So it's a super just simple thing, because I like that you didn't say like an NFT photographer. You know what I mean?
No,
like
that's not a thing.
You're a photographer, right?
Hot take. That is not a thing. That's not a thing. I feel like you're a photographer who sells NFTs. That's a better way to look at it. I think that that's right. That's another reason why, like, when I answer that question, I feel like I take it so generally. I almost want to now kind of say, like, I'm not even a photographer, but like, I kind of want to identify with artists more than photographer, because I feel like there are things outside of photography that I want to, and I'm definitely I'm doing illustrations. Like, I have, you know, other ideas. I have videos I want to, you know, there's a lot of stuff outside of just this one thing. Yeah. But I do think a general identity is good to have, because it keeps you from getting boxed in. And I see a lot of photographers starting to say, I'm an NFT photographer, I'm an NFT artist. And I think that can be good to some extent, but like, I guess my concern is like that makes you think, okay, how do I shoot to be in the space? How do I shoot photos to participate? And I don't shoot like that. So I can't say I'm an NFT photographer. You know, I don't know if that's a hot take, but that's kind of where I'm at.
I mean, I feel like at one point it was, and I feel, you know, and it still might be. I still see it all the time, like, to be honest. Like, and totally. And you'll see, and you actually reminded me again, like, I keep having this thought, but like, even me in the early days, like, of recording artists and having conversations, I would put NFT artists, like NFT, you know, like, that's like, it seems like a natural thing to put, you know, just because like we're super excited to be in this space. But, you know, the more, and that's honestly just due to my own ignorance of like how all of this worked. Cause like I didn't collect art or even have the desire to collect art until I could collect it digitally, because I'm in an apartment and physical space is limited. And, you know, to me, talk about boxing yourself in, like, that to me was like, I don't want to have to make a decision like that. That to me is like an anxiety inducing decision on like, what art do I want to put on my wall? And if I do that, then who else am I excluding? And like, what else would I want to have there? You know what I mean? So I didn't know any of this shit until I could, you know, represent it, or until I could have it like digitally signed and shows that I own it, you know, on a digital format. I didn't care about it. So all of this is like, and I had this conversation with Shakai, you know, where it's like, none of us came from an art background, you know? So it's like, there's a lot of like, when most people come, this is a new generation of collectors. It's a new generation of millionaires. It's a new generation of collectors. It's a new generation of artists. It's a new generation of everything, right? You know? So it's like, none of us had this before. So all of this is like super brand new. And it's part of the joy of being early, is we get to figure this out in person. You know what I mean? Or figure it out as we go along.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And that's kind of like, and so going back to the whole like identity thing too, like where people are saying like, I'm an NFT artist, I'm an NFT collector. I think a big part of that is genuinely just excitement. But I just have such I do have a belief in the idea that like, you know, the things that you say to yourself and the things that you identify with and call yourself, like you become that thing. And I don't like the idea of just producing stuff inside the space. And that's one of the reasons why, and I'm probably guilty of it. Like if you go through my tweets, I'm sure you'll find me saying I'm an NFT artist at some point. So, you know, nobody call me out after this, but no, yeah. I mean, it's just like, I think it's important to recognize, like, you know, even the folks that have only had an opportunity to collect NFTs, that doesn't mean you're just an NFT collector. It just happens to be what works for you. But I think that you have the collector interest in the collector mindset. It's a broader thing. It's not like, I guess I guess to sort of solidify the point, like if you had all the space in the world, would you collect physical items? I think most people probably, I mean, maybe not, but most people would. And that's kind of where I see the same thing. It's like, if the NFT space didn't exist, would I still make photographs? It's like, well, of course I would. I was. And so, you know, it's that's kind of why I'm like, I can't do that. I have to break that habit of telling myself I'm this artist and just be an artist, a photographer. I don't know. Getting a little ranty here, but yeah.
No. It's that's always welcome, man. Cause like to me, that's the beauty of these things to further like solidify or to further validate of like why I love doing what I do is because you don't typically get rants like this in the Twitter space. So, you know, it's how you figure out who people are. It's like in the rants and the tangents and the, you know, and this and that. But it's like, you know, even with me, I've struggled with that as a content creator. It's like, well, if I'm just boxed in as a content creator, that means I'm only subject to like a certain type of style to put out. And I've had that conversation. I think Dave Krugman, Eric Rubens, a couple of people that like I heard talking about that. I was like, you know what? That's actually really accurate, you know, and it feels my whole thing is that I don't want to ever feel constrained to something. If I want to like let my curiosity run and go do something, that's what I'm going to go do, you know? But I think part of it though is that, and I'd like your take on this, but part of it though is that like, we're always searching for comfort in something. We're always searching for kind of like a way to define something, you know, to where we can like, it's not as scary and jumping off the deep end. And like, we can feel like a little bit more comforted in the way we identify ourselves. But I think at least for me, if I'm being honest, it's been it's like a lot of that is me not really understanding who I am and like the journey to like discover, like the journey to self-discovery and the journey of like, what is it that I really want to do? Who is Kyle really? Like, what am I here to do? And that, I think part of it though, is we go through these like little, or at least me, I'm not going to speak for anyone else, but I went through these like phases of like identifying with my job and identifying with this and identifying as a dog owner and identifying as all of these things. But it's like, you know, we don't really have to do that. It's like, these are things that I enjoy doing, but it does not define like who I am as a person. You know what I mean?
No, I love this idea. And I can't tell you how much I relate to what you just said, like back, you know, cause, I feel like up until maybe, you know, and I'm 24 now, I've been out of college for a couple of years, but, you know, up until college, I feel like, you know, I identified as a number of things. Like I actually produced music. So I was like, oh, I'm a music producer. But then like tomorrow I would be a skateboarder again. Or I'd be like some mixed media. Like I would just identify as all these random things. And I think a part of that was there was like a fake pressure. It's a perceived pressure to cling to an idea of yourself, like to define yourself as this thing. You're right. There's like a comfort that people seek in doing that. And there's validity there. But when I got into college and then I was, you know, I stopped skating as much, but I still was like, I'm a skateboarder, like, and then I would start identifying as, you know, I'm a scientist because I'm going to school for science and I was doing science outside of school. And then I'm a photographer. Like I had all these things going on. And eventually I was like, I'm just Austin. And at this point, I'm kind of like, that's why I'm getting more and more general. Cause I'm like, at this point, I don't want to say I am one thing because tomorrow, like I may wake up and decide to explore something that ends up, you know, sticking with me for life. And I don't want to feel like I don't want to feel like some awkwardness about rebranding toward that direction or whatever. Like I want the open ability to just do what I want. And I feel like once you realize that you're a very explorative person, some people aren't, and that's fine. You can totally, nothing wrong with identifying as one thing, but I think you and I are in a similar boat where we're creative and we're explorative and, you know, we don't know necessarily what we're going to be doing in, you know, 10 years. And for that reason, I feel like identifying as I'm a photographer, I'm probably going to be a photographer in 10 years, probably going to be an artist in 10 years. Those are safe labels for me. But saying like I'm a landscape photographer, NFT, like I can't wedge myself because I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to be shooting in 5 years, man. Like, I don't know. And it's, I'm sure the same in your case where it's like, you don't necessarily know where these conversations will actually take you. It's like, they're so open-ended and you could end up somewhere, some trajectory that you maybe not plan for. So it's scary. And I think that's why we look for labels when we're creatives. Like we look for a way to follow suit. We see everybody else has a label. We're like, we got to have one of those. We got to, it's important, but you don't necessarily need one, It's funny because like we're in this world, like everyone's saying like, just be yourself and just do this and just, but yet it's funny. That's the lip service. But if you look at the actions, it's, now like, I'll just give an example. Like, I'm not sure if you follow Alpha Centauri Kid, like one of my favorite artists that I followed. He's a crypto artist, native last year. We can chat a little bit more about that offline, but he did this massive like performance art open edition of a piece of art that he did. And like, I'm not going to share the whole story, but it's like now that he's done that, now I'm constantly seeing open editions everywhere. Right. And it's like, but it's like, by all means, be like, do those things. But if you're preaching like, be yourself and do all this, like, and you're just following the herd, you're not actually being yourself. And, I'll tell you, this is a rant on my end. Like I don't hate the phrase, but I hate the way people say it so nonchalantly of like, well, just be yourself, man. Like, that's just so easy, it is one of the hardest. Like, I feel like that is, in my opinion, one of like the main goals in life is to like figure that out, like who am I and what legacy am I leaving behind? Right. Like that to me, the two most like, if you want to call them super high level questions, but it's like that encompasses everything that I'm doing here. It's like, who the fuck am I and what do I want to leave behind? How do I want people to remember me, et cetera, et cetera. But it's like, it's so funny that people will do that, but yet with clothing we'll follow trends, with art we'll follow trends, with different styles of drops we'll follow trends, but it's all in the, but the people that are themselves are the people who are starting that, you know what I mean? And again, there's nothing wrong because we all do it to a certain extent. Like I'd be a liar if I said I didn't do that, you know what I mean? Well, I think there's a balance to be struck. It's like like I think where I draw the line is like, let's use the NFT space as an example, since I think at least right now, probably a good amount of the audience is coming from there and they'll understand what I'm saying. As an artist, I don't think it's, and you mentioned open editions. Like, let's say that I have a piece that I think would be cool to produce as an open edition. I want a lot of people to own it. Like, I don't think it's necessarily bad for an artist to see the success of other artists using a specific strategy and to try to mirror that in some way with something that genuinely fits. But my concern is if I started producing work because I think it'll sell, like that's where there's a line to be drawn for me. And so I think what this question is about for me is like, where do I draw that line between participating in a market and trying to find some success without going so far as to mold myself into some selling object, something that will perform nicely. I don't care as much about, I'm not money motivated enough to be, like, let me give you for instance, in the NFT space, it's very true. And, this is, again, maybe we're going to get into some NFT hot takes here, but but it's definitely very true that like landscape photography as a genre in the NFT space is the one that sees the most volume. It's the most popular among the collector base. And it definitely has like, it does the best in the space on a general, I think that's pretty fair to say. And, I have landscape images. I could totally try to produce a landscape collection. I could have done it a year ago. I could do it right now. I'm not going to do that. Because I'm not a landscape photographer. I don't identify with that work. It was something I shot on, say, a road trip, and there might be a handful of images in there that are actually, good enough that fit some narrative I have, and maybe they'll end up in something down the line. But for the most part, I have no interest in producing something just for the sake of seeing success in other people and saying, okay, I can fit that mold. I'm not doing that. I can't do that. And that's where I draw the line. So there's like a balance between like, you can totally, you can alter your trajectory as long as it doesn't conflict with like your own integrity. If you know it deep down yourself, like, why am I doing this? Am I doing it to sell? Like, or am I doing it because it'll make me popular or whatever? Like, that's where I draw my line. If I do something that I really want to do and it happens to also be something that's popular, that's different. I don't care. You know what I mean? And if somebody wants to judge me for that, that's fine. I know inside, like, I'm good with that. I sleep, I'm sleeping well. I'm good. But that's where I draw the line. Is I do see some folks in the space that are definitely following some trends for sure. And more power to them. Wish them the success. But I'm not doing that. I can't do that.
And it's also part of, like, as you're saying that, I'm like, shit, man, like, am I just choosing to highlight the negatives and everything? But Sean, I had a conversation with Sean Monday, and we talked about this around, how to work with trends. And like this goes into like exactly what you're saying, is that, like, I feel like at the end of the day, if it sits right with you, if it complements what you're doing, if there's an intent behind what you're doing, if there's a reason why you're doing it, then, like, rock on.
Exactly.
It's and that's the funny part with humans, is that, like, this is a real, like, I've been super fascinated with, like, the dynamic of, like, the artist and the collector, because, like, typically there are a lot of, like, very different mindsets, and, like, what people want and, like, how people think things should be done. But, like, the reality for me is that, like, as a collector, I love artists that are just, like, doing shit that makes the most sense to them, and being a part of that journey.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. But it's interesting that you said, you mentioned it that way, because, like, it's, sometimes it's easy for someone to like me to, like, look at something and, like, well, what was their true intention? And it's easy to pass judgment without really knowing. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting topic, because we're all here speculating, but at the end of the day, it matters, but it doesn't. Like, I feel like I'm going in circles here, but, like, you know what I mean?
I think so. I think this is interesting. I'm trying to organize my thoughts here before I don't want to, like, talk out of my ass. For one, I'll shout out to Sean Monday. I really love his work, and I also respect his opinions and his outlook on art as a space, and just as a, his medium is really interesting. The way he uses photography, big fan of his work, and he's extremely original and on his own path. I think a big word you mentioned is intention. I think a big portion of all these judgments can really come down to intention. I'm quick to think, like, oh, they're doing this for the money. Oh, they're doing this for the clout, for the popularity. I'm really quick to do that sometimes, because I'm a human being and biases pop up.
Right.
But I always remind myself, like, wait, what are they motivated by, though? Because, want me to be frank, there's nothing wrong with being motivated by money, and there's nothing wrong with being motivated by popularity or wanting friendship or wanting a network. I definitely have no objections to either of those motivations. So if somebody's actual intention is, I want to generate income, or I want to build a fan base around my work, or I want to build a big network, so that I can get client work, or I can, build some for some reason, I have to respect that they're doing what they're supposed to do based on that intention. If their intention is to be an artist, and they tell themselves or tell people they're an artist, but they're doing stuff for popularity, that's where I'm like, okay, that's where I think it's fair to call it out and be like, I'm not going to call it out, but, like, to think those things, and you're kind of valid. It's if somebody's calling themselves an artist, but they're very clearly just kind of doing what they see working in the space, for lack of a better term, like, that's where they're missing their intention. They're losing their way. That's kind of how I like to think about it. So, yeah.
And I guess, this is an interesting topic, because I almost, like, especially myself, is that, like, obviously the way I view the world is not the way things are, and it's not like my way is not the only right way to do something. And, we're all built differently. And I look at this conversation, this is going to be an interesting tangent or interesting tie-in, but, like, when it comes to products, when it comes to products that I buy, like, I'm one of those people that will spend a lot more money on something one time versus buying a bunch of, like, half-assed products that I have to buy 6 times and end up spending the same amount of money, and I don't, that's actually a really bad way to put it, but, like, it's almost like, and when I say half-assed, like, I mean, like if you were to frame that in the artist's potential of, like, half of their potential of, like, their journey, right? No, it's like, totally. Okay, like, investing in someone early in their journey, where it's like, okay, cool. If they are doing it for the attention, then they're going to attract people that only want to buy it for the attention, right? Or, like, they only, like, there's different products for different people, and, like, that can be.
That's a good way. I love that. Yeah, and from an art perspective, and to be real, like, there are collectors in the space that they pick up those, those big items that are definitely done for popularity because those items will get themselves some popularity. There's truth in that for sure. And that's not, that's not the majority of collectors. That's probably a decent portion, but not the majority by far. Like there's, you know, a lot of, and there's not necessarily, the other thing is, again, like I can't knock if a collector's intention is I'm going to build clout by collecting popular items. I can't, it's a mission. You know what I mean? Like that's their mission. I'm not going to hate on somebody's mission. I'm only going to be frustrated when I see people pretend one mission is their mission when they're actually super motivated by some other thing. That's the issue I have. And that's where it comes down to, like, there's got to be some integrity to what you're doing, you know?
Yeah. And you know what's, I think as we're having this, the one thing that I think is what makes this so challenging is that, you know, we all have our own individual paths, but in a community that's so very new, there is like a shared path and a shared dialogue and a shared, like, this is who we are and this is what we do. To where, you know, there's like this community narrative, and then there's this community intention, and then there's these individual intentions, right? So it's this weird striking balance of, like, you know, like obviously back in 2021, it was the WAGMI, right? Like, you know, like obviously that's not the case. Like it's more of abbreviated where it's like the people that continue to show up and continue to learn and continue to just have a better opportunity of making it.
It's
right?
a much longer acronym.
It's a much longer acronym, but like it WAGMI sounded so much better. But I feel like there's, you know, there's so many different parts, there's so many different segments and sub communities within this already super niche community. You know what I mean? And it's like, there's like the idealist, and like, there's like the people who just like are just purists. And then there's people who are money motivated. And then there's people who are socially motivated. Then there's the people who have a little bit of everything. Then there's, you know, but it's like, it's almost like the conflict for me as we're having this conversation is that, like, it's almost like we have the community narrative and then we have our narrative, and it's like, well, are they just trying to match the community? It's this balance of like matching the community narrative, but like embracing your own.
I was going to say,
you know what I'm saying?
I think one of the struggles, and this is true, like outside of the NFT space, this is true in every single community. There's going to be always this like general kind of like a herd narrative where the majority of folks are supporting this frame of thinking. And then each individual is going to make a decision to either match that as much as possible, you know, both publicly and internally, or blatantly deflect it. And there's a handful of folks I see in the space that blatantly deflect that, you know, big community narrative. And a lot of the people that deflect it don't perform well in the space. And hey, it's a challenge. Like, you have to find, a balance between, like, it's all integrity. So it's like, if you truly don't support something you see going on, like, and you jump on the bandwagon because it makes you look better, like, there's no integrity there. You know, that's not, and there's a reason why, like, there are certain things I really will talk about, and there are certain things that I'm not going to speak on because it doesn't concern me as much as it seems to concern, you know, certain folks in the space. So I don't know. It's important to be, like, true about what you actually care about. That's kind of where I come from for all this stuff.
Yeah. And like picking your battles, you know, it's like, what is this worth? Is this worth falling on my sword for? Is this worth like dying on this hill for? You know what I mean? It's challenging, man, because we're also building the plane as we're flying it. So the narrative is also constantly changing. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I'm glad that you brought up the integrity piece, because, like, you know, now that we're in we're in a bear market, now we're in, you know, we've been in one for a little bit, and we're starting to see a lot of people leave that came in, even though it's painful. And obviously I'd love to see things doing better. But I kind of was low key like wanting this for a while, because I've only known up only. Yeah. Right.
You want to see how, no, I definitely, I mean, I don't think anybody, I know what you're saying. Like, there's a test that's going on right now. Like, it's right. So what we have a lot of is, okay, so going back to the artists that left, I just want to touch on that real quick. Like, I don't care, and I'm not bothered by them. I saw, I'm homies with a couple of the Instagram photographers that came over and dumped their feed into a collection and then walked away with their bag, and, you know, whatever. I'm not going to, because again, like, their motivation was, I saw a way to make money, and I'm a freelancer, I'm an artist, like, I'm hustling, I need to make money, so I'm going to do this, and that's fine. I think my actual interest and kind of concern, but an interest that I have is, during this bear market, the test that I'm paying my attention is actually on the art collectors. So I want to watch all the people that are saying things like, there's a lot of collectors that are criticizing the decisions of artists who have left the space, the artists who came in, saw some success, and as soon as there was a bear market, they bailed. I'm really curious to watch what they do when those artists come back during, a bull market, to see if they start collecting from them again, because I guarantee you they will. And that's, again, it all comes down to, why are they tweeting those things? It's because of the popularity behind those tweets. It's because it fits the social narrative. Like, they're just tweeting these things because they know that it makes them look good as collectors and as influences in the space. But at the end of the day, like, I have my eyes on them and I'm watching to see what they're doing, because I want to know, I don't care, but it's just more like, just like how, collectors like to curate the artists. I'm kind of in the camp of curating collectors. Like, even if a collector collects from me, that doesn't necessarily guarantee we're going to have a good relationship. Like, I may just, if I don't agree with the way that they operate, like, I'll appreciate that, but I'm not going to necessarily jump to their feet just because they collected something from me. And that's all integrity. So I'm watching, man. I feel like everybody should be paying attention to what people are saying now in the bear market, what they're criticizing for when the bull market comes back, and whether it's 6 months or 2 years. Like, I'm just saying, there may be it's going to be quite interesting to watch. Like, you don't have much else to do but pay attention to what people are saying and doing. So, and it's a lot easier because there's so fewer people actually active. So that's kind of where I'm at with this. Like, again, I really hope that the folks who are preaching about, supporting the people that push through the bear market and are, quote unquote, building through the bear market. I hope that the people stay consistent when folks start returning in the bull market. There should be, based on that logic, there should be a rewarding factor for folks who push through. And I'm guaranteeing there won't be. That's kind of where I'm at. Is like, I'm a bit cynical about it, and I don't think there will be as big of a reward for people as we want to believe that there will be.
I have a mixed,
go for it. I want to hear. For sure.
Mixed feelings on that. I think that, when it comes to people being rewarded through a bear market or through that, I tend to say they will, because I think that, going back to something that Deez and I talked about, and it was really, it wasn't exclusively, we were on a space, and it was just like, going through markets like this, it allows you to put yourself in a position to be lucky. You know what I mean? Where it's like, like, regardless of like, I don't ever think that the reward is just going to happen if you're expecting it to happen. You know what I mean?
No, for sure.
But I think that there will be a reward in the sense that you're going to learn a lot through this, to where you're going to be able to have that much more knowledge, that much more opportunity, know exactly who's staying here, who's doing what. Like, you are actually going to be, the people who move through this are going to be primely positioned. And not only that though, but like, the amount of shit that I've learned about finances and just markets and people in general through both sides of the market, I feel like it's going to put me in a way better position to understand how this works moving forward, and like what to make bets on, how to look forward in the future, like what to do, what not to do, but at the end of the day though, I look at someone, and I go back to him, like, I look at someone like these, and I look at some like Farouk, I look at some of these people where it's like, and even something 6529 said, it's like, most people don't really start seeing success until their second or third cycle. You know what I mean? The people who are here for those longer term horizons, people who have a long-term approach, those are the people that are going to notice. And to be honest, those are the people you want to notice.
For sure.
And while it may not be all of them, like, that's kind of just human nature. Is most people don't have a long-term approach here, but the ones that do definitely will. The ones that don't, maybe wishy-washy. The ones who don't have a stronger conviction in either why they're here, what they're doing, how they're going about doing, those are the ones, which is where the majority lie, is that they may not.
No, for sure. I think everything in this conversation seems to just come back to that intention. Like, why are you here? But what I'm sort of referring to is I spoke of my criticism of seeing collectors critiquing the actions of artists who leave, but then supporting those artists. That's sort of what I'm referring to, is like, what is their true intention? Like, is it really the long-term conviction in the, social welfare of the space, or the monetary welfare of the space, or is it popularity deep down? That's kind of more what I'm criticizing. And it seems like the loudest voices, the people that are, saying these things, like, the folks who push through the bear market are going to see that success. Like a lot of those collectors specifically, and I'm more talking about art, not so much traders, not so much developers, people, buying and selling. I'm more looking toward collectors specifically, because that's what, I'm an artist. That's really what I know the best in this space. And it just seems like I just see a lot of that, where it seems like their motivation deep down is actually not necessarily what they're portraying. And that's kind of why, like, it makes me cynical about this, this idea of reaping some benefits. From an educational perspective, do I think I'm going to be ahead of any artist that comes in the space during the bull market? Definitely, 100%. And from a relationship perspective, definitely 100%. That's totally, that's not even debatable. Like, that's just true. Like, if I push through, the bear market, the folks that I speak with now, those relationships may benefit me in the future. What I learned from people may benefit me in the future. That's absolutely true. It's more of, it's more just about like the social credit, I guess, that comes with being in the bear market. People speak about there being that social credit around that. And I don't actually think that part exists. I think it's almost entirely the education, the relationships, and a little bit of luck too, but definitely, I don't know. So that's kind of where I'm at, is like, I just, I'm trying not to, one of the things I learned in this space very quickly was that, you can't, like the wag me thing, for example. It's like, I believed that for about a week. And then I was no, that's silly. Like, this is a market. I was like, this is not this, so I think for me, it's like, I've been really good about ignoring those like open-ended promises that I think we see a bit of in the space, and focusing instead on just like, how can I better my own position and the position of the folks in my circle? That's really like kind of what I'm constantly thinking about. So, I think you made some really good points, and you give me a lot of hope, because again, I feel like I'm cynical about this type of stuff, and it's good to get those more optimistic opinions, because I don't know, it can be draining to be pessimistic for sure.
But on the flip side though, it can also be draining to only think optimistically. Right. Like, cause in a sense of realism, because then there's no sense of balance. There's no sense of like reality. You know what I mean? So I think it's a good thing to have a little bit of both, and it's good to be healthy, being skeptical in a healthy way. Right. It's or cautiously optimistic. Right. It's something that like I've struggled with as well, because I believed in the wag me a lot longer than you did. Right. Cause like, now I'm a natural optimist. It's like,
that's fine.
Know that like, I believed in that a lot more. But I also think that something that we're both not considering here is, just because we haven't been there before, is that every time a bull market comes is going to usher in a few more new collectors, a whole different breed of people. There's going to be a lot more volume of people coming in. So therefore there will be a lot more opportunity. And when people come in, and if you look at some of the target audiences that have yet to come in, whether it's from the trad art world or people that like collecting things, physical art in general, or just the mass majority of people that like to buy art, is that, like for me, like it's not always the case, but like I love going back and looking and seeing how long artists have been creating for. And it's like, okay, have they been doing this for a while? Are they going to continue to stay? It's cool to see the journey. It's cool to see the provenance. It's cool to see people that like have been here for a long time. So like, I would say, just to like share, to like bring a new light to your, like, just to bring a new perspective here, is that like, there's going to be a whole wave of people. It's just human nature. Is like human, like, especially with art, art's not cheap, right? Like, we're spending lots of money on art. So like, we want to like, we would like to like, know that people have done this before and that they've been here for a while. And especially we believe in their story. And there's a lot of different reasons to buy art, but it's like, we have a whole wave of people. If we truly have conviction in this technology and what we're building here, then we also have to assume, we almost have to have a little bit of like childlike, optimism that like, okay, if we do believe this, if we are so bullish on this, if we love what we're building, then we have to assume that there's going to be a percentage of those people that come in, because that's what happened, in 2021. And a lot of people's lives were changed because of that. You know what I mean? So
definitely,
it's a fun conversation to have, because I think, and I'm in the same boat, because I'm a little bit more pessimistic during this year than I obviously was last year, right? So it's like, it's interesting to watch my own behavior then versus now, and like how I'm reacting, and like what my sentiment is when I wake up and scroll Twitter every day, or like what, like, and and it's gotten like slightly more negative, so but I think it's just part of it, and I think part of it's just like, this is the first, I'm not sure about you, but this is the first time I've been introduced to any sort of like financial market. Like, this is the first time I've given a shit about a financial market.
Pretty much me too. Like, I've dabbled a bit, but I'm not like super savvy or anything. So, I'm kind of in your boat where this is the first like legitimate bear cycle, especially in crypto, that I've gone through. And I'm trying to treat it as a learning experience as well. Just not just with art, but also just like my holdings, where am I putting my money? It's totally a learning experience. No, going to your point about the value placed on kind of just an artist's history and artist's journey. I think that's an area where I do have a lot of hope, because there are quite a few folks in the space that I think have been underestimated so far and maybe undervalued, and their time, I think, is coming. There is some hope there, because they're so talented and they have the history that you're talking about, where they've been pushing their work on social media and all these other silly avenues for years and years, and seen little to no returns on that. Not that it's about that, but you know what I mean? Like, their time for success, I think, is coming. They'll blossom in the space at some point. And so that's kind of why, like, especially during this bear market where, things aren't flying like hotcakes and it's really difficult to find people interested in purchasing work or just opportunities to make money in the space in general. I focused almost all my attention on like, how can I make the art as good as possible? Because like when that liquidity comes back, I want to make sure that I put my best foot forward, and that, and it's also just like, I mean, this is what I do anyway. Like, I've been making photography, making art for a very long time. So it's like, what else would I do? You know what I mean?
No, I can appreciate that, because that's exactly the point that Chad had made when we had our podcast, where it's like, there's too many conversations about like, try to like on how to like life hack, etc., or like how to like get ahead on certain things. And he's like, there's not enough conversations about how about you just get better at art.
Oh man, I want to tread lightly, but I really think that is the biggest, most important conversation that needs to be had in the space. Is it's a two-pronged problem. It's artists producing work that I think could, to be completely frank, is replicatable. It's not unique. And on the flip side, it's collectors having trouble developing a taste to watch out for that, to avoid picking up work that, it could be more easily produced, and trying to find unique, but it's all about, again, like good artwork comes with some type of, it's either a historical importance, it's a message, it's something very unique and pretty expressive from a person, from somebody who, if it's a photographer, somebody who witnessed it, a painter, it's something they feel, believe, whatever. And I think that right now the space from an art perspective is missing a lot of that messaging, is missing a lot of that intrinsic, I don't know. It's just there's expression that's being missed, I think. And I've had me and Chad are pretty good friends in the space, and I've had a handful of conversations with him on the phone about topics kind of in this realm. And him and I are very on the same page, where, it's really easy to watch people in the space sell. It's really easy to see those folks make a lot of money and get collected by big names, and to complain, to say, oh, they made a lot of money. Why am I not making money? Why can't I sell my work? But at the end of the day, the best thing you can do is just say, like, how good can I make my art? If you focus on that, like bare bones, what somebody's getting from you when they buy your NFT, for example, is a piece of art. Make that as good as possible. Like, that's what you should focus your anger, hate, whatever bad energy, you just focus on that. Think about, like, how can I make this better? And there's ways to do so. You put in the time, you put in the effort, you put in the thought. That's the big one. You put in the thought, and you will produce better work. I think Chad is doing, I think, for especially in the landscape space where it's extremely difficult to come up with something different. I do think Chad's work was really unique. I also think the presentation style, like he did at CompStomp with the VR glasses, super smart, really, really strong way to use the technology, in pair with NFTs. It just felt modern. It had a really good touch to it. And I think it was genius. And I think that that's the type of thinking you have to start applying to your work. And this is, I guess, my message to artists. Like, I agree with Chad that first and foremost, bare bones, like when you feel the urge to complain about something, like, and it's natural to have those tendencies, but try to revert your thinking back to like, okay, how can I improve my art? How can I improve my work? Or is there something I'm just blatantly not doing well in the space? Like, is there connections I need to make? Is there a better way to share it? I don't know. Like, I've literally tried everything, and at some point some things work and some things don't, and you can kind of narrow down to what works better. And it's all about it's really a huge amount of effort. It really is. And it's easy to complain, but I think when you take that complaining energy and you revert it back to your art, you can improve, and you will eventually see success. I mean, and if it's not in this space, it'll be outside of this space, because art gets rewarded in the traditional realm as well. So it's like, there's no reason to not do it. Like, there's no reason.
Yeah. I mean, I won't name the tweet who tweeted it or the person who commented on it, but it was like, that is one of the biggest, especially if I don't have a relationship with the person.
Yeah.
It is one of the biggest turnoffs is when I see like, well, you're complaining so much, but you're only collecting from these artists. How about supporting some some artists that are like just coming up, or like it's essentially telling people how to spend their money, and out of a place of like, and you can tell I could tell there's like a lot of pain, and there's a lot of like, he wouldn't, that person wouldn't just like post that just because everything was going great. It's obviously because things aren't going great, and it's a reaction. It's a lash out by it. Yeah. Right. Like,
when I put out something good and I think it deserves to see a collector, pick it up, of course I'm going to feel, everybody does. Like, if you don't, you're lying, and that's silly. Like, don't lie to yourself. Like, you definitely are feeling some angst, and you need to surround yourself with a circle that you can call and say, hey man, I'm feeling like I want to just complain about this. Like, I'm frustrated. Can I just vent a second? And then you feel better, and you don't need to tweet about it. Like, you don't need to, that's the big thing, is like, if you scroll down my Twitter, scroll through my Twitter, I'm sure you'll find a tweet or two where I complained about something going on in the space that came from a place of insecurity, where I was like, I wasn't doing as well as I could, and I wanted to complain about it publicly for some reason, because if that feels good, I guess. And it does it on some level, but it's really important to, instead of doing that, like the way you present yourself, to the folks that may support you, that's important. And I think that you can't make them feel obligated to support you. I'm in that same boat where, like, go check my wallet. I bought pieces from people that I think deserve more attention than they're getting. Like, I try my best. People are going to actively try to do those things on their own, but criticizing a whole pool of people just because your day didn't go well, or your collection didn't go well, whatever it is very silly. And I see it very consistently in the space, and it's tough though. I understand why, but I'm kind of in that same boat where I recognize, like, I've put a lot of emphasis on relationships and who's in my circle. And because of that, I have a place that I can go and be like, I know this work is good. I think it deserves this, and I'm frustrated that it's not getting this. And I can get to vent them. And then they were like, bro, shut up, relax. And I'm like, you're right. Like, nobody, you need folks in your circle that will check you and be like, hey man, like, you've done really well. It's been a year. You've killed it already. Like, don't, stop, relax. And getting that reset is extremely important. And I feel like some people don't have that relationship in this space yet. That's, to me,
they don't.
Like, when I came into the space, thankfully, like, I had been on photo Twitter for like years before that. And so I did have some relationships already, but that first month or month and a half, all I did was like strengthen relationships or build new relationships in Web3. And I think that focus it was sort of like, I considered it like an expense of time. Like, I was like, all right, I'm going to lose a month and a half of my social media time, but it's going to pay off later. That's kind of how I try to treat it. And so if there are people that already have workout, it's never a bad thing to like revert your attention back to like, how can I develop a community again? Because I feel like I lost that. You know what I mean? Like, that's really important. Yeah. So I don't know. But yeah, just going back to what you said, like, it's really, I've tried, like, even if I have my criticism, and again, I just publicly criticized, the attitude of some specific collectors I'm thinking of in my head on your podcast. Like, if they see this, I don't care. Like, because I'm honest about it, but I'm not going to go make a general tweet like all collectors do this, because that's not true. The majority of the collectors in the space, I appreciate and I really like. I actually appreciate their opinions. I think they, they're doing a service to the space, and that's important. But I also think it's okay for me as an artist to say, hey, like I see some collectors doing this. I don't like that, but it's a real opinion. Like this is something I've marinated on. This is something I've thought about for months. Like I'm not the type of person that's just like, I'm mad today and I'm going to post a tweet about collectors. It's like, you can't do that. You got to work. You got to go to work. That's really what it is.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. But I also, and again, it's why am I here? What have I like, what am I prioritizing? Like, because here's the thing, what you're saying is that no one here knows what the fuck they're doing. Like nobody. Like, and that's a life thing.
Idea.
Like no one in life knows anything about what they're doing, you know? So like when I finally like internalized that, it made things a lot more simple. You know what I mean? Where it's like, it helped like melt the ice a little bit, if you will, you know, but it also goes back to even some of the people that are making an insane bag. Remember, like, I didn't see, you know, I've been in this space for a year. Even though I can scroll through all their work and scroll through what they've done, I don't see the full journey. Like we don't see the full journey on social media. We see the best parts. And it goes back to a conversation of like, I feel like the success is going to happen when it's supposed to happen. And like for me, at least, there's an over focus a lot of times on the results and like when it's going to happen and how it's going to happen and obsessing about that one limelight moment versus like, okay, how, like it's about enjoying the process of getting there. You know what I mean? Like, and it's like, the reality is that like for some of the success that some of these people have, I wouldn't know how to handle all that right now.
Oh, bro. I was talking to my barber yesterday and I was just basically like, you know, a lot of folks want to see that big, you know, hoorah moment where they just like make it, whatever that means to them is whatever. But they're not like, they haven't even prepared for that moment. Like if it showed up in front of them, they either wouldn't recognize it, or if they did recognize it, they would choke. Like they would full on choke. It's like a rapper going up for his chance to freestyle in front of a producer and he just has nothing on his brain. Like that's literally what it is. Yeah. And I feel like people need to recognize that, like, you don't just jump from 0 to success. Like there's so much in between, and that in between, when you like, if there are moments that define your success where like, cause for some people it's just continuous. And I feel like as artists, it can be both, but especially for the folks who see success in those spontaneous, like, oh my God, my collection is just selling out, or I just got a huge bid, or, you know, those big moments, like was, they made a relationship with somebody and they were prepared to do so because they had a really strong concept behind the work, and they asked them a question and that question led to a conversation. And then they were able to really, really establish like, hey, this is a valuable piece. And that's preparation. Like it's not flinging up your best work and hoping to sell. Like it's not complaining on the timeline. Like there's a lot of preparation, and that's such a weird specific example, but I think that there's so much truth to that. Like you got to be prepared for opportunity. That's a huge, huge portion of success, is not just the success, but actually the preparation for that. Cause it can be, I feel like it's like if you were a movie star or something, it's like, I would not be, if I suddenly was famous and I walked outside, I would not be prepared to go down the street and just be hounded. That would be terrifying. I have no idea how to handle that. You know, I don't have a PR team. I don't have security. I'm not prepared. Like, and so that's kind of how I think about it, is like, you have to think about all different types of opportunities as something that needs to be prepared for. So if it pops up, you can seize it, you can grab it, and you can make do with it.
Again, placing yourself in a position to be lucky. You know what I mean? Like that.
Yeah, that's right.
It goes back to that conversation. That's something that I thought about a lot after we had that Twitter space. So speaking of, you know, questions and we've been sharing a lot of experience and a lot about the community and how to grow here. Want to flip it to something a little bit more lighthearted, a little bit more necessarily light. Not that it wasn't lighthearted, but just a little bit more fun. Yeah. Is, you know, when it comes to like the favorite, like who are some of the favorite artists that you've collected from recently, or who you mentioned there was a couple people that you're like, I really think they deserve to be put there. They just haven't found their time yet, or they haven't been noticed. Yeah. So I want to just know, like, what do you like to collect? What are some of those people that you collected from?
So for one, what I like to collect, I haven't succeeded in yet, because some of the pieces that I want are so expensive and out of my wheelhouse that I would have to get damn lucky to be able to afford them. But I want to throw out, you know what, I'm gonna pull up, like, I have like lists on Twitter, and I feel like this is a good way to do it. But I have big one, Ben Zank is probably one of my favorite artists in the space right now. Have to give a big shout out to him. I think that he, in the NFT space, him and Brooke started a big Brooke is bro.
I love
Brooke
work
her
too.
color is incredible, and Ben's color has gotten, even in just this year of him really focusing on urban anomalies and just all these like crazy concepts he has. He's gone from what I'd say is like almost like what seemed to be, maybe I'm wrong, but it seemed like the colors a year ago were more natural, and he's evolved to like, he's editing the color of his suit and like objects and like and it looks real. It looks like the object looked like that. And it's like, I'm so impressed by that jump in editing skills. It's just insane. Brooke is an obvious shout out. I think I would say like my favorite artist, and I actually I don't think I've collected anything from these folks yet. If maybe someday I'll be able to afford to. Samantha Cavett is definitely like probably top of my list. Top of my list. Briscoe Park's my favorite photographer of all time. Shout out to Briscoe Park.
Gotcha.
It's definitely one of the most influential on me personally too. But I just really appreciate his work. The stuff he did down south was not only absolutely terrifying, the fact that he would just go to these locations, but also just like really well done, super stylized, just incredible. Summer Wagner, again, another person like 2 years ago or a year and a half ago or maybe not even, that was like a year ago when I encountered her first, like from there to now, the level of like expertise that improved and just like the concepts behind her stuff is just really interesting. And I'm a big fan. And then, I mean, there's a lot of like contemporary artists that are coming into this, or not contemporary, like sort of like former, like Joel Marowitz and like all these artists, Bruce Gilden, like a lot of street photographers I'm big fans of that I see in the space. And I know there's some criticism of their presence, and that's fine, but I'm a huge fan, and I understand why they're here. So I like their work. I don't know. I think there's a handful. I've like some other people, like there's a artist, Angel, and I don't know her last name, but I believe she's from Texas. Yeah. She does like really colorful water work. Angel Ram. I don't know what her last name is, but her @ is like
I know her.
Ange _ Ram. Yeah, she's I like her work a lot. It's super interesting. Definitely, I can't really think of any other folks in the space doing anything like that. I'm trying to think, man. I could do this for like an hour, but it'll take me a second to like think of new names because I'm on the spot.
You're good. I wanted to throw a little bit of zinger at you.
Yeah. I have to. Sorry, I have to do this one more. Lil Minaj. I can't not say it, bro. And because she's, there's a lot of people doing rooftoping in the space, but the way that she's pursuing it, I think is like borderline activism. Like if you follow her on socials, she's just really active. She has a really good message. So if people haven't seen her yet, definitely got to check her out for sure.
Hell yeah, dude. No, I hadn't heard of her before. One thing, I'm glad you said Samantha, because Samantha and Summer, because those are, I've actually had both of them on here. Those are two of my favorite people in the space ever. And I had the pleasure of meeting them.
I met them both too. It was amazing. Yeah, it was awesome.
Surreal, man. Super surreal. So now that we've gone through that, and if you have some more, randomly pop them in.
I probably will.
I'd be remiss. Like we talked about all this stuff. We talked about how to, like different things we've learned and how we've showed up and gone through some of your favorite artists. Now I want to talk about your recent super rare sale, man. Like just happened. Yeah. That's happened today, man. So so what was like, I'd like to just talk a little bit about like, what was the process behind that photo? What's the story behind that? Why did you choose that as your super rare Genesis?
I'm still shook for sure. Okay. So, I mean, really, it was the photo itself, like why I took it. There's nothing more to say other than really like that's the type of work I do. Like my current goal and my current pursuit is, I'm shooting a lot of street photography, but I'm also shooting a lot of what I kind of have been calling new topographics, like man-made landscapes. Yeah. That's basically like what it falls under. And I do that everywhere I go because my idea is, not a lot of people are doing that, and there are definitely some good folks doing it, but it's less common than say like landscapes or just street photography even. But just focusing on what does stuff look like? What do the dwellings folks create look like? What are we doing when we occupy a space? And what that looks like in 2022 and the 2020s, what it's going to look like 50 years is going to be so different. And having a huge catalog of work from this time period, I think will be really important at some point. So that's kind of the motivation. It's really just like, I think these spaces are beautiful. I think the way that humans take natural land and create something extremely comfortable and modern, and from a technology perspective, so advanced, with raw materials that they come up with out of the ground, and they make a foundation and they build something on it. It's incredible to me. And I don't know anything about architecture, but I love shapes, and I'm extremely attracted to the compositions I can find in places like suburban neighborhoods, or even cities. Like cityscapes are cool, like back alleys in cities. It's like, what, this is so interesting. And that's always drawn my eye. I've always taken, there's some draw there for me. And so that's really the motivation of it. And I went on a trip to Cape Cod with Nevin Johnson, Nevin Color on Twitter. Nevin Color, he's a film photographer. And our buddy, David Loucher, who actually I met through Nevin as well. So when we were there, there was a woman actually staying in one of the cabins. And it was like beginning of the season, because I think this was April. So it was like spring, like early, like not really a time where people are staying on Cape. And I just went up to her because she was gazing out at the sunset. And I just went up to her. I was like, hey, like, we're here photographing the cabins. And in my head, I'm thinking, how can I get something original that hasn't been done at this spot? Because again, it's been photographed now kind of heavily. And I was like, how can I do that? And I asked her, I was like, can you turn the lights on inside this cabin? We're going to photograph it when the sun sets at blue hour. So there's still some light in the sky, but everything else will be dark. Yeah. And she did. And I ended up getting that photo that I put up on Super Rare, which was just this really ominous kind of soft painterly photograph of these two cabins adjacent to each other, lights turned on inside. You can kind of see some warmth coming in from the sun that had just set, but there was still some like warm atmosphere from that side. So it was cool. It was a really fun night shooting, and I'm really stoked on that photo. I made a YouTube video about it too, which was cool.
Hell yeah.
Which has been fun.
And one of the things that stuck out to me on that was that because you recently, released your Sleep in Suburbia collection, and it's like, that to me was a totally different feeling from the Super Rare piece, where it was like, this is supposed to be like warm and like, blue hour and like this kind of like, they're in this beautiful scenery. But then you look at Sleeping Suburbia, I believe all of them are at night. They're all at night,
like 2 a.m. like super late.
Yeah, man. There's like this kind of like, I remember you talking about one of your spaces. It's like almost kind of like capturing. It's like we have this idea of like what suburbia is, and it's like it may not always be what you think it is. And so it was kind of like this like more ominous, like dark, kind of like you don't really know what's happening. Even though it's, we have this narrative around what suburbia is supposed to be, like the safe, comforting, kind of like middle class lifestyle.
Exactly it. I'm stoked that these are kind of things you're drawing from it, because these are all feelings that I'm kind of like interested in seeing if I can evoke from those photos. But I mean, from a personal side, there's definitely a lot of motivations behind it. And like I grew up in like this relatively middle to small sized town, like good populate, like normal sized town. And that's where a lot of the photos are set. A lot of the sort of darkness and borderline like eerie energy that you kind of feel in the photos. It's inspired by things from, my past, from my childhood, particularly, for example. And one of the things that as an artist, like I have some mentors behind me that are kind of helping me learn to share work in the most professional manner possible. And I found that I want the work to have a more historical intention, even though it is driven by obviously like my inspirations, which are again, those personal themes from the past or whatever. And so basically like if you read the description, like I don't talk about like what inspired the photos, but I do talk about the intention of the project. And it really is just about, I love that. It's about capturing, this place that, like you said, like we think of it as this warm, inviting, exciting place. Everybody in the city wants to get out of the city and own something in the suburbs. It's that home ownership aspiration. And there's so many drawbacks and negatives to it. There's so much loneliness there that people don't think about. And that's kind of what I want to evoke is just like, I want you to think about like your hometown, which is usually a pretty comforting thought for most folks. Maybe not, but I'd say average folk probably comfortable thinking of their hometown. I want you to question it. I want you to think about like, what was actually terrible about it? What was actually scary about it, perhaps? That's what these photos are about for me. It's about seeing if a person looking at it can think like, oh, I remember there were some rough times back then, or, I used to be bullied in school, or I was lonely, like things like that. I want people to be like mindful of where they came from and, what, the idea of home really actually could mean. And it's also, I've also just,
I like that.
There are other inspirations as well. It's like, I have, from horror movies and the color grading from video games, like random things. Yeah. Like so many things that I'm just so interested in and inspired by. I've really conglomerated into this style of photo. And the difference between that and then what you saw with the cabins photo, I think a part of it is just, for my more general work where I'm just shooting to document, it's for documentative purposes, and I'm going to process, I'm going to edit, I'm going to make it look the way I want it to look. But if the scene felt warm, I'm going to make it feel warm in the processing. I'm usually not one to like try to conflict it and like make it feel different. I also don't think it works, to be honest. But those suburban, like it really is dark and uncomfortable almost. Like it's unsettling and you're silent and you're alone. So that's, I want the processing, like the style I bring out in the photos to match like the actual feeling that I had when I was in that space. And I felt invited when I was at those cabins. I felt like I was a part of that ecosystem for a second. I felt very comfortable. I walked right up to the porch thing and put it down in front of one of the cabins and had an angle of the second one. It was great. It was, and the woman again was so sweet and nice about letting us photograph. It was great. And so I wanted to convey like it wasn't a moment where I felt alone or uncomfortable or any eeriness. It was literally just like I was in this beautiful place witnessing the sun leaving the earth for the day. That was really cool. That was all it was. Very straightforward. So sorry, rant over.
No, you're good. I'm glad you said, because it wasn't until not only seeing the other piece, but talking about just kind of like having that little exchange that we just did around. I didn't really look at Sleeping Suburbia in the same way. Obviously, like after this conversation, I look at it a little differently, and not because of obviously the story that you said plays a role in that, but I think more if you look at it from a higher level, it's more of the contrast of your super rare piece versus the Sleeping Suburbia, right? So it's like it's almost like for me, I'm an interesting collector where it's like sometimes it takes having a conversation to fully understand and not necessarily just getting all the details, but just having a conversation about another piece of work or another piece of work that is the complete opposite of what you've done. And not necessarily opposite, but it's meant to portray a different feeling than what you did with this other one. So I find it very interesting now that, like, to me, Sleeping Suburbia has a whole different meaning because of the two drastic differences of like emotion that you intended for people to feel. And as someone who grew up in the suburbs, right? Like I grew up in a very great, like it was one of the best, like it was almost like it was a suburbs, but there was all like, we had these different areas and I lived, quite frankly, lived in one of the better ones. But I also like, there was times, especially in my adolescence, and like, those are some really tough times. Because like, that was where I started. That was like when my drug addiction happened. That was when all of these things started to come to fruition. That was when I stopped doing things that were really productive for me. And it was that shift into doing things that were just against the world and what my parents said. And it was this just really, really rebellious nature. And it was an area where I destroyed a lot of my life. You know what I mean? And so I think it's a really good, and if we can tie, like, I don't know if this exactly ties back, but I'm going to make an effort to tie it back. I think it does. But tying it back to what we were talking about, the narrative in, like we have this like community narrative in the NFT space, but then we all have our own individual narratives and struggles that are happening underneath this umbrella. And it's like, do they necessarily align?
Yes.
Right.
That's like basically what the project is about. It's like everybody thinks that the concept of home is comforting. And to a lot of folks, believe it or not, that's not always the thought that comes to mind. Like that's kind of what it is. It's like, I want it to be about, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, I'm trying to draw on what you just said, which is like, yes, there's definitely this common idea of suburbia. There's an aesthetic to it. There's and there's also like an assumption of maybe comfort or even like class. Maybe like if most people in suburbs are like middle class, for example, like I think, or maybe even I was middle, lower, whatever, there's all tiers, but it's like, it's like I don't know how to explain it. There's these blanket things that get thrown over places like suburbia or city life or whatever you want to call it. And I really wanted to, in case I had a viewer that looks at my photos, I want it, instead of tying to that general narrative, I want the photo for them to tie to like, oh man, I hated growing up in the suburbs. Like I had no friends at school or my football coach told me not to skateboard. Like these are things that were true for me. Like I used to get yelled at. I would break my leg skating and I'd get screamed at. Like simple merit, but it's also, I had a lot of intrinsic stuff too, like things that are going on in my own head that I didn't understand how to deal with. And I'm still trying to learn how to deal with. And those really came out heavily, like while I was a kid in the suburbs. And I didn't understand them. And so it's all going back to like the intention of that project being, I wanted to create imagery that evokes that sense of question, like what is home to me? Like what does my hometown mean to me? What is it actually as comfortable as I remember it? I want it to be and not in like, I don't want it to be like triggering, but I want it to be just a like an honest is really what it is. It's like I want you to, when you look at it, I want you to be honest about those memories, that's what it is. And so it's definitely a heartfelt project for me, but it's also something that like, I talked earlier about how I want to make sure that any art that I produce like there's an expression involved, and those are the personal narratives and personal themes and personal motivations. Like that's where I'm expressing myself through this project that has its own intention that could live beyond just Austin visual. Like it doesn't have to be me. I don't have to be attached to the project for it to make sense. Does that make sense? Like it stands on its own, and that's what I wanted, because I don't want it to be resting on, I went through an experience and I need to keep that experience attached to the pictures. Like they could stand on their own and somebody might arrive at almost the same intention that that's sort of what I was hoping for. So yeah.
Awesome, man. Yeah, no, I'm glad that, because it helps. And I don't have a full answer for it right now. It's going to be something that I think about a little bit more, but it's like what the idea of home really is, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, the idea of home, the idea of family, like the idea of like all the, you can start to question everything. And I think it's healthy to do that because, there's one of the reasons why I think I enjoy this space so much is that, this is the space where I feel like I can be a 3-year-old, like, and have this like childlike energy and like just have this like just this sense, like this infinite curiosity about things. Cause like, when we grow up as kids, like, depending on how people grow up, there's always a part of your life where you were just asking so many questions. We were asking so many questions. We were just so curious about like figuring out how this life thing worked. And like at a certain point, and it's different for everybody, there's a certain point where that changes and the world starts to shape us versus us shaping the world. Because as a kid, when we're asking questions, we're shaping it, right? And so I think this is a beautiful spot of like being able to undo a little bit of that. Yeah. Like with your art, it's like, cool. Yeah. Let's like maybe undo some of the narratives, because a lot of times, in my opinion, or not in my opinion, but in my experience, like growth is about subtracting, not adding. Like it's about subtracting narratives. Yeah. It's about removing, because there's narratives that like anytime I'm coming up against an area where it's like it's time for me to make a leap of faith, it's a story that I'm telling myself that I don't fully believe anymore.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. But yet letting that go is like painfully terrifying, because I've relied on this narrative and this story and this belief system and this fear, whether it's a fear, for X amount of years up to this point, and now it's like this story isn't really serving me anymore. So what's the new story going to be? Or like, how do I undo that? You know what I mean? Yeah. So yeah,
it's, you know what I mean? It's also like we talked about this way earlier with the labels and the identities. It's like you don't, there's comfort in those things. And just like there's comfort in narratives that you can cling to, but like true growth is in when you find that you now have the ability to rely or you lose the need to rely on the label as well as the narrative, like whatever you want to call it. And that's when you start to transcend that concept and you can actually be an individual. And that's what I'm finding as well. Whereas like, and I'm 24, bro. Like I'm going to have a lot of growth to do, and I'm still a mess in some places, and I'm well polished in others. Like I'm going to be, work in progress for a long time. But I think that I'm starting to see that where the more comfort I see in open-endedness, like the better person I'm becoming. And also just like I get better at things being open-ended like that. And I get better at my perception of things is more realistic. My expectations are not as high, and they're more adjusted for reality and realistic. I want everything to be, I'm just trying to keep everything healthy, and that's hard for everything. Like it's not just work and, it's relationships, friendships, like learning to adjust all of those things is crucial, and to not fix on like, this is how things are supposed to go. Instead, realizing like not everything fits that structure. Like you're going to have instances where things deviate from expectations or deviate from the norm, and that's still, and they're still healthy. It doesn't mean it's wrong. And that's kind of tough in a lot of cases, I think, for people to accept. So it's
tough, man.
Right.
It's tough. We're gonna start wrapping up here. I want to challenge you though, because you're a natural skeptic. So I want to ask you, what is it something that you are the most optimistic for in the next like 2 to 3 years? It could be art, it could be the space, it could be anything, it could be literally anything. What is it that you are? Yeah.
I don't, just because I'm cynical and skeptical of a lot of things, and I'm definitely pessimistic by like in my heart, my soul, I feel like a pessimist for sure. But there's optimism I have. Like, I think a big one is just that, I'm realizing that, all right, so I am not working in biotech anymore. I'm actually full-time creative currently, and I'm making it by. And to be honest with you, I've been making it by for maybe like 5 months ish. And I really didn't know that I could. And for my entire life, everybody was like, yeah, do it on the side. But like you gotta have a real job. Like you gotta, and I'm realizing like, I'm not saying that I'm at where I need to be yet, for sure. Like I'm not even close to where I want to be, but I'm definitely way more optimistic about the potential to get there. Whereas, if you asked me 6 months ago, could I be a full-time creative? I'd probably tell you, no, that's not realistic at all. And if you ask me that question right now, like I think that in 2 or 3 years, as long as I keep consistent the way that I've kind of been right now, I do think that I could be a full-time creative. Whether that means I'm doing wedding work or it means I'm doing NFTs and YouTube and all these cool things that are way better, like that's fine. Like I'm happy to, as long as I guess the optimism is like, my optimism is that I can reject the traditional routine. The traditional trajectory for somebody in my position was 9 to 5, move up the career ladder, and that's it. And it's not that I don't want to do that. It's just that my preference would be for something where I control what I'm doing on a daily basis. And it's more about like, what works for me versus what works for the entity, the company, and that's kind of where I'm at, is like, I'm very optimistic about the next couple of years for that reason, I think. So
I love that, dude. That's a perfect way to end this, man.
Right.
Good
note,
I love
positive note.
I love that shit, dude. No, that makes me happy. Dude, Austin, this has been a treat, man. Want to give you one last shout out. Like where can people find your work? Where can people get in touch with you? Where's it you want people to go?
I think the best place, and considering your audience, I think the best place to find me is probably my Twitter and my Instagram. So I have Instagram is at AV did it. Just like AV did it. Yeah. Like I did stuff, you know, and then my my Twitter that I'm currently using is Austin_visual. So you can find me, you can find me there as well. And I'm posting regularly on both. I think my Instagram is the best synopsis of like my holistic catalog of stuff. And then my Twitter is more like what I want to share on a daily basis and opinions and whatever. So, but I appreciate the ability to plug, and I really appreciate you bringing me on.
This has been awesome, dude. Thanks again for coming on, and thanks again for riffing with me and doing all the shenanigans here.
Yeah, for sure. No, this is cool. I'll do one again in the future, like a follow up if you want. So I know you've been doing a couple of those with people. So if I do something spectacular, we can do it. Or if I fall and I plummet to ground zero, we can also do that, you know, and we can talk about how what I did.
Talk about the story, dude.
Exactly.
Talk about the story, man. Well, hey, I'm just going to tell you, this is of course not financial advice, but like every artist that I've had on here, has had whether it has anything to do with this podcast or not. I'm going to make that really clear. Whether it has anything to do with this, every single person I've had on is still fucking crushing it and usually doing something way better than they were when I had them on.
I hope I'm sure that'll rub off a little bit. I'm sure. I know.
Do with that what you will, man. We're gonna end it on that, man. Austin, again, dude, hang out for a little bit. But this has been awesome.
Yeah, man. Absolutely.